All right, so now without a further ado, let's move on to the panel session. I would now like to invite Dr. Aurel Moise, Mr. Ho Chai Tik, Mr. Jite Nauta back to the stage for panel session. Joining the panel is Dr. Loh Yi-Wen, who is the Senior Assistant Director of the Environmental Sustainability Team in the Policy and Planning Department in PUB. Let me now hand over to Yi-Wen, who will be moderating the session.
Hi, good afternoon, all of you. Can you hear me loud and clear? Let's start with the first question that I think will be most appropriately answered by Chai Tik. On the coastal protection that's gaining a prominence in Singapore. What are the key trade-offs that we have to choose? I think it was very clear that we have to choose trade-offs between protection and also losing some of the things that we are used to today. Chai Tik, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. What are some of the trade-offs that we have to choose? Well, so let me just give an example. If we don't do anything, right, we just want to deal with it and let areas be inundated and not protected from sea level rise. Imagine if your port were to stop operating, nothing comes into Singapore, right? Nothing comes to Singapore, your airport is inundated. Nobody gets in and out, right? So Singapore being an island with very little natural resources, almost nil. We have to import almost everything, including our food supplies. Right? This will heavily impact us. Right? So imagine another scenario where we don't protect our power generation plant. If this were to go down, we will not have even our webinar now. You cannot do anything, right? So I think these are things that are what we call the trade-offs. So, but when we talk about coastal protection, we need to come with what is known as what we normally describe as a risk-based approach. So maybe areas like your parks, well, you can live with a little bit of inundation occasionally. You just clean up and do the repairs necessary. But if let's say you're talking about critical infrastructure where you cannot accept any downtime, that's where you need higher levels of protection. I think this is how we have to deal with it, right? Rather than building one gigantic wall all around Singapore. So I think that I would say would be the trade-offs that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I guess it's not easy to choose between trade-off either. And I think it's a difficult job that you guys are doing for the whole of Singapore. And some people might say that it will be something that is quite painful for you guys to decide one or the other. Let's go on to the next question. I think there's one for Dr. Aurel. I think the one on the burning embers diagram, I thought it was very interesting because when I was reading it, listening to your presentation, it was something that caught my attention. And I think the question was that what are assumptions behind the burning embers diagram? Because the description seems to be rather qualitative. Does the IPCC associate the percentages to be risks and impacts stated in, sorry, the thing got jumped up, moved when I was reading off. Risk and impacts stated in diagrams for that you had in your presentation. Would you like to take that question?
Sure. So, so these kind of diagrams in IPCC, like this amber diagram, are large scale, and they're sort of not very detailed for zooming into things. That's why these reasons for concerns, the 5 reasons that I mentioned there, are also quite broad. So the amber diagram is meant to give you like a broad, more generic view on these things, and the only more detailed information on this is, for example, the confidence levels assigned are these gray dot points along the side in terms of low or very high confidence, and they speak to the IPCC definitions on confidence levels. But otherwise, and that's why the color is also not distinct. It sort of moves between the colors. So you can't read too much details in this, and the assumptions in there are also very broad in terms of threatened systems or extreme weather events, because we know that extreme weather events are different in different parts of the world. So there has to be like a mega approach to all of this that gives an overall assessment on what they call reasons for concern. So you can't put percentages on this in terms of how much percent is this threatened or this threatened, but I think what is really clear is sort of the broad position where the future warming leads into this key broad areas of reasons of concerns, you know, whether you're in purple or red or yellow. These are sort of the key things to watch out for. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's just a way of presenting a lot of data sets, right, into something that's very coherent for the general public to understand. I think let's take a question that I think that is general across all of you can contribute, which is something about climate change being a hoax. Sorry, I was moving again. Some people think that climate change is part of a conspiracy theory or hoax, right? And that's something it would not happen in their generation. I think among all three of you have very diverse background. What do you think, in your view, that what the government or the scientists should do to convince the public that climate change is real, and that what actions can be taken in our lifetime rather than waiting for your a generation or two generations down? Maybe we'll start with Chite first.
Yeah, this is something which will exist, I think, forever. But in the meantime, and that's why I started off with these examples of what's already going on in the Netherlands at the moment in terms of extreme floods, where we didn't expect it, droughts over the last couple of years. Everybody in the meantime is affected. A couple of years ago, we were reviewed as a country in terms of our water management by the OECD. And they said water management in the Netherlands, it's perfectly managed, but nobody is aware of the threats. In the Netherlands, there is a system that we all pay taxes. We pay taxes to our water boards, the regional water authorities, we pay taxes to the national government. And in return, apparently everybody expects that things work out in a safe way, while we all live at or below sea level in the most western part. And that is something our government is working on, making people more aware that we live in an exposed area where towards the future things need to change, and this is why we work out these different strategies of no action, open systems, accommodate with the sea level rise, or simply retreat from a certain area, and part of that is building in different parts of the countries, the eastern part of the country. And that discussion, I think everybody in the meantime is now involved with. Everybody sees what kind of impact it has. So yes, I think deniers will always be there, but more or less everybody is facing some impact already. And in that sense, it's getting easier to do something.
How about Dr. Mose or Chite, do you want to add to this?
I can. Definitely, I can. So clearly, we're already living in a world of change. You know, the evidence is all there, and we, as Gigi said, there are always deniers out there who will dispute the evidence that's there, but it's irrefutable, the evidence that we're already living in a world of change. Extreme events are already increasing in terms of temperature and rainfall and other things. So there's enough evidence that's really there. To me, communication is a key. How to communicate what is already there and what is projected into the future. So one way that I see the government can actually enhance this is to invest in more good science communicators, you know, in all parts of government areas, to promote and translate the science into something that is easily digestible. And we just talked about this ember diagram, which is sort of an example of translating lots of complicated science into one diagram that has impact, because people look at it and it has impact. And so I think that's something that would be really important. Apart from the science communication, I think in the other thing that's really important is a government that shows leadership and says we build everything we do in terms of policy and planning on the latest and best science. This is the only, and Singapore is certainly one of the countries in the world that's up front there, clearly saying that we listen to the best science there is, and then we do our planning and write our policies. And there's a lot of other countries out there that are not following that rule, and they're facing difficulties. So I think those two things are really important.
Yeah. Maybe I just add that, well, the thing that some people believe that is a conspiracy theory, I think probably these are people who will not live to see the effects of climate change. That's why these are the people who are creating all these problems. They won't get to see it, and they throw it to the future generation, which is quite sad. But I think for us, within PUB, we can just see in the last 20 years, we can see that there was instances where Lingu Reservoir became dangerously low, and we saw Orchard Road being flooded, right? So these are evidently out there to say that, well, droughts do become extreme and rainfall do become extreme as well, right? And I think as a coastal engineer, I think compared to when I started as a young resident engineer on site, yes, sea level has indeed risen, because there are times when I started as a young engineer, I could still walk on coral reefs during low tide. Now there are no more such luxuries. Everything is inundated already. So there is already, within the span of 20 years, sea level has risen, not that much, but you can see the effects.
It's noticeable, especially you have enough of the time to see the changes, in the last few decades, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I find it quite difficult because as a scientist, right, communicating a lot of data sets to general public is quite difficult, because you tend to want to tell everybody what you found, and because misrepresentation is very easily done, especially if people want bite-sized, sexy sound bites or headlines, and then they just remember the headlines and not the details. I think that's a very big challenge for us scientists going forward. Okay, let's continue the next the next question. I see that the question is not really coming in anymore, so I do encourage the rest of you who are listening in to please vote for the question you want to go up, and then or add in new questions for our panelists. Let's go for the one for you, Chaitik. You mentioned that coastal protection requires a whole government approach, right? Can you please share some examples on how PUB works with and deconflicts coastal protection with other agencies? I'm sure you've seen a lot of discussion, whether it's intense and whether it's painful. Maybe share some experience with the rest of us.
Oh yes. I think well, when we talk about coastal protection, like the earlier question, some people are naysayers, right? It doesn't happen. So for us, I think when we plan coastal protection measures and strategies, it must be supported with good scientific results, things that we can convince people and to make rational decisions. That's why we work closely with Dr. Ora and his team to get the latest inputs on sea level projections, what this could, how, when, and to what magnitude this would happen going forward. I think this will aid us in planning coastal protection measures, because infrastructure like this takes a long time to implement, right? So we are really looking in the future, looking in the crystal ball, and try to come up with a measured approach so that we do sufficiently right, remain adequately protected, and then monitor and then review again. So this is something that we have to do. And with other government agencies, we work very closely with Urban Redevelopment Authority to see how we try to opportunistically look at redevelopment areas. So we try to integrate projects to prevent abortive work and see how we can best integrate measures together harmoniously with the land use of the area. So these are some examples that I can pick on.
It sounds very cordial.
Of course, we throw punches around. I think we need to understand each other's concerns, the competing views, the conflicting viewpoints, and reach a common ground. Because I think once we let the other agencies know where our concerns are, and we also address where they're coming from, I think that's where we find a matching point and we can get win-win solutions.
Yeah, win-win solutions, I think on everybody's mind, because I think climate change doesn't affect just one country, it affects everybody and every single person living on this planet. I think I had this question that would be help that came probably from our guests from the region, because I think it's right at the bottom. It says, what are some of the useful climate adaptation solutions and technologies that you guys recommend for coastal countries? Yeah, I think this one, maybe Tito, you want to take this question, and then maybe Chaitik, you can also chip in.
Yeah, I think this also links to another question, which I also saw on the low density coastal communities. Yeah, each situation is different, and we're all facing the same problem coming to us, but it requires dedicated approaches, I believe. This is also what we usually try to do when we look at these problem settings. For instance, when I was looking at an urban area, Yangon, which was affected in Myanmar, which is affected by coastal, fluvial, and pluvial floods. And the idea was, let's try to work with nature-based solutions, which are relatively low-cost solutions. At the end, it is an urban environment. We were studying all sorts of different scenarios of different cyclonic events, sea level rise, but also subsidence in combination to extreme high river discharges, extreme high pluvial events, rainfall events. And then at the end, we ended up with problem solving by nature-based solutions of 10 to 15% of the total flood risk. Because limited by space or limited by other things, you can only do so much through that way. So what we say in the Netherlands, gray where needed, green where possible, was very true for an urban city like that. In a different study, what we recently did for the World Bank in the Philippines on islands which show low community impacts, I would say small communities. A cost-benefit analysis will not help you to design all sorts of protective structures like the dikes or whatever, because it's simply too costly. What sort of solutions do you have? And then again, you look at that nature-based solutions with all sorts of co-benefits for the community. But at the end of the day, when things are really getting extreme in terms of sea level rise, you have to consider retreat from that area. And I must say that many of these coastal communities, they live also usually at the downstream ends of rivers. So it's a combined effect of river discharges, rainfall, and sea level rise. So threatened from all different directions. You can try to work out solutions, but yet at the end of the day, when things get extreme, retreat may be the only solution there. Well, the city of Bangkok, which I showed before, with such a huge GDP behind it, could easily afford to build protective structures like we did in the Netherlands, because we say we can afford, so we have to protect that land. Till when? That's then the big question. But urban areas require a completely different approach than the more rural areas and are the more agricultural areas. That's basically also what we soon will try to publish in the paper on ASEAN, where things work out differently for different parts of the area.
Okay, I think when we look at solutions and technologies, I think that's where I think it is very useful for us to share information on developments in the various technological fronts and advancements in techniques to handle such situations. That's why I think we are planning for this research program to look at how we can better deal with sea level rise issues and how we can deal with flood alleviation situations. And this information can be shared, something like what we call a basket of possible solutions, but each individual city or country need to look at this and see which are those that will be relevant to them. Certain areas, as what Jite mentioned, are more nature-based. Certain nations could be like Singapore, densely built up. Basically, you have no place for complete nature-based solutions. I think that's where I think having a full basket of possible solutions provide the option for all of us to learn from one another, build upon earlier ideas, and see what will best fit your needs in your area.
I think it comes with the cost also, right? Because with some of these will be quite expensive, and for most of the ASEAN countries, it might not be something that they want to invest today, because the cost is quite substantial, right? And you need the political will to want to do these things.
Yes, that's very true. I think cost is also something to be considered. I think in Singapore's case, I think we have very strong political will to get things done, because basically we have nowhere to retreat to, right?
Yeah.
But certain areas, if let's say maybe the island is just a part of their swath of landmass, then they can have the option to retreat to another area. But here we can't do it. So those countries, I think it's good that actually the small island nations are actually coming together to put a strong voice to this situation, so that there is adequate resources being shared around, so that there's nobody left high and dry when dealing with such a calamity.
I think that right now the compensation talks and COP27 seems to be very heated at the moment. But it's very interesting to see how it will pan out in the next couple of COPs that's coming along. I think we're coming up with about 5 more minutes, but let's keep one more question to Dr. Mose. There's this question on the IDF curve, but I'm not going to ask you about that because I think only the PUB people want to know the answer. I'm going to ask you about the one on the IPCC one. Which is the question on, and moved again, how Singapore is doing for the Paris Agreement with the IPCC reports and COP27. How do you think we can reduce, Singapore, right, can reduce our impact of climate change?
So, so I think with regard to the Paris Agreement, we all know that only last month Singapore announced that it'll raise its national climate target to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And it will also reduce emissions to around 60 megatons CO2 equivalent in 2030 after peaking earlier. So that's part of the national agreement that Singapore gives. So I think that's that, and I think they did this ahead of COP27, so that they can go to COP27 saying we're part of the net zero by 2050 club, and so that's where Singapore is now part of this. And I think that's a really good step and a really good way forward for Singapore. Of course, everything only works if all the countries pull together, or enough countries pull together in the world. It can't just be done by one. We all know this, but every sign counts, and it's going to be a slow process to get everybody pulling in the right direction. And of course, so for example, the impact of COVID on emissions globally, we know there was some reduction, but at the same time, the unfortunate recent escalation of the war in the Ukraine pushed things up again, because everybody is now stockpiling anthropogenic fuel again. So it's we're back up again with regard to global emissions. So I think that a continued push towards a global reduction is really important.
Yes, this is important, and I think it was like for me when I saw that most of the countries are now going back, opening their coal fire stations for power, and for this winter season, it's a bit like we feel kind of upset, because how polluted it would be. Anyway, I think we're running out of time. I'd like to thank all our panelists for their very honest and very candid sharing. Also, I thank all the participants who have sent your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't capture all of your questions that you want to ask, but I'll hand this over to Jingzi, who will take back the moderation.
Okay, thank you, Ewan,